So the founder plateau is where the founder goes out, does all the networking, drives all the revenue, and then boom, they're successful. And they're also out of time, right? They're busy like dealing with HR issues and delivery and scaling. And then what happens is they stop doing sales. They stop doing everything that got them there. And then they start grasping for sales and marketing solutions.
Welcome to a Listen Learn episode of the Share Life podcast. I'm Jason Scott Montoya, and I'm speaking with Josh Sweeney of Founder Scale about B2C versus B2B revenue generation today. Josh, say hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Josh is the president at Founder Scale, which helps companies scale their revenue in a repeatable way with a proven sales system. He soft launched Founder Scale in 2020 after selling his company in 2016, and he was on the Share Life podcast soon after that transition. So if you'd like to go back and listen to our conversation, it's episode 35. In 2020, that pandemic year, is really when I launched the podcast. And I've since done another 120 episodes since episode 35. In this discussion, we're going to talk about B2C versus B2B revenue generation. To get us started, I want to read a passage from my second book, The Jump, From Chaos to Clarity for Your Striving Small Business. This comes from chapter 2. And I thought this perfectly aligns with Josh and Founder Scale and what the work he's doing and the ideas that I put in my books. Bang! That was me hitting the invisible ceiling with Noodlehead Marketing, my established small marketing company. We had grown year over year until finally I hit my limit. My approach to leading and managing got me to my current level of success, and it kept me busy, but it wasn't moving us forward towards sustainability and growth. For 3 years straight, our company income was stagnant, and we couldn't get over the hump. It turns out this stuck point is a common occurrence with founders. How we initially fueled our success worked, but the same way fails to sustain and grow. Something is missing. Rather than being content with the success we have, we are frustrated and we can't elevate beyond the ceiling. Instead of dealing with the root issues, we become easily distracted, chasing shiny objects, ideas, opportunities, people, and technology to alleviate symptoms, but fail to reach that elusive sustainability. Thus, founders enter into the year of wandering in circles. They're changing things, shuffling people and systems around, but are never genuinely moving the business forward. This unfolding change can last years, and for a handful of founders who fail to address the root problems, decades. So Josh, what are your thoughts about that? Talk to us about this idea, the ceiling.
Yeah, it's really interesting and very affirming, to hear when another founder kind of came to the same conclusion, because it sounds like you came through it through experience. I had the same experience with my first company and eventually broke through that ceiling. But what we talk about and kind of how we've named what you're talking about here is we call it the founder plateau. So the founder plateau is where the founder goes out, does all the networking, drives all the revenue, and then boom, they're successful. And they're also out of time, right? They're busy like dealing with HR issues and delivery and scaling. And then what happens is they stop doing sales. They stop doing everything that got them there and or to that point, and then they start grasping for sales and marketing solutions, at least in our space. And so it's interesting to see, how many times that challenge has come up, and it's so common for founders to hit that plateau.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason that when we're in that place that we grasp for all these solutions, we think they're going to solve it, but it's like we're missing something. So talk to us about what is it that we're missing? Just changing things won't create the outcome we're looking for. It has to be the right type of change. And I guess in the book, one of the things I talk about is that change is almost internal to the founder. Something in them has to change. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think there's two core aspects there. I mean, the first one, you nailed it, is the founder. It was interesting when we started Founder Scale. We're like, okay, everybody claims to have all these lead generation solutions, and you just pay them money and they'll help you generate leads. And our perfect client is actually a company who's tried that 3 or 4 times and realized it's not as easy as the market might have you believe. And what we found in working through what really works for founders is, one is the mindset. A lot of founders will continuously reflect on what got them there, but then they're doing something fundamentally different now. So it's networking and going to events got them to this point, and then they wake up and we say they try to jump this chasm and just start doing ads now or just start doing SEO. And it's you're just starting something completely shiny object to try and solve a problem when, what got you here worked really well. Um, so yeah, mindset, like you said, is a big piece of it. And the second thing we look at is what do they need to grow and understand from a revenue perspective, right? How did they get there and how do they continue to leverage what got them there instead of chasing a shiny object or a quick fix solution?
Yeah. So it's funny because you use the word chasm, and
Oh,
the first chapter is facing the chasm.
wow. This is like a mind meld here. On the same track.
So, um, another thing that comes to mind when you say all that is, and I'll use marketing just because I can think of a quick example of this, but there's particularly internet marketing. There, just over the years, I've done things, creating a blog post, doing a social media post, posting something on YouTube or whatever, and I hit success, right? And I think I kind of figured out the success. So I sort of like bookmark that. And then I'm like, I'm going to come back around to that later on. But when I come back around to it, it's like that a tactic doesn't work anymore.
Right.
And I actually, because the things move so fast, it's like I realize, oh, I should have just like kind of milked that until it ran out and then moved on, versus like kind of bookmarking it, trying to come back later. Like I'll use, we're both kind of playing around with Instagram Reels and social posts, video Reels. Man, when I first tested Instagram Reels, I was getting like thousands of views. And now if I can get like 200, I'm like, wow, this is a good video. So
Yeah.
something that worked several years ago really easily doesn't necessarily work as easily now. So talk to that idea about like when sometimes the success is an external factor and we sort of absorb it as if it's something I did.
Yeah, I mean, what we like to do is figure out what works. And we like to also be really clear about defining what works for a founder. So in our space, when I use the word works, or let's start externally. Somebody goes, oh, well, I did a bunch of social posts and I got a lead. It
Yeah.
works, right? They're claiming success. For us, something that works in sales or marketing means it generates ROI. I spend
Yeah.
$1 and I get 3 in return,
Hmm.
including the cost of the time and the people. That's what to me defines something working from a
Mm,
sales and marketing perspective, is that ROI. So what we like to do is we actually like to really just double down. We look
yeah.
at and go back through where the founder or the company receive their leads and their deals for the last 3 years. And we find
Yeah.
the pattern and say, okay, how would we double down on that instead of doing shiny object over here? And
Yeah.
then from there, we like to say, okay, well, how can we start to test out other areas like with what you're talking about? Should we go
Yeah.
test social? Should we test ads? But don't get off track with what's working. Like it's the Pareto principle. 80% of your work should go to the thing you already know that works really well. And
Yeah.
so that's goes back to what we were talking about earlier with mindset, right? We
Yeah.
really like to figure out like, okay, what works? How do we stick to that? How do we brainstorm how to do it? Because a lot of times people don't know how to double down in a given area. They don't
Yeah.
see that pattern or path. So those are all things that we've worked through before and help them through that journey.
Yeah. I think you're hitting on kind of a key theme, which is letting go, learning to let go, willing to let go. And that I think is a key piece of it. The fact when I had my marketing company, I did shut it down in 2014 and I ended up transitioning to become a freelancer. And in your case, you sold your company, so you sold one business to switch it. And I, for my experience of doing that, um, letting go of the company, like in a way, it really felt like a death, like in my case. But I had to like learn to, I was sort of like letting go of all these things and it was very difficult. But through that process of like, oh yeah, if I let all these things go that I kind of maybe was afraid of letting go, like the world doesn't end, things keep going and new opportunities come. And everything is better on all fronts act, for the act of letting go, which was sort of a leap of faith and facing those fears, ended up turning out to be much better. And so I'd be curious what your thoughts are on just the importance of letting go in all of this, and whether you see that as a core dynamic at play when it comes to founders making that level up.
Yeah, what immediately comes to mind for me is when I do like my workshops, I have this slide and it shows different companies at different revenues. So it has like a column for less than 1 million and a column from 1 to 3 million, and like 3 to 10 million, which is a big range. And what I show on that slide is the companies under a million usually get the majority of their leads through like one channel, like one sales or marketing channel. And the
Mm,
companies 1 to 3 million usually get it from 1 to 2 channels. So
okay.
the market would have you believe you have to be posting on social and doing newsletters and doing networking, and you have to be on all of these in all these different places doing all these things to be successful. And there are some compounding effects for sure as you scale up. But what we find in the data that we have for all of our clients, because we track a lot of information, is it is the case that you can just, if you're sub million, you can do one thing really well and let go of all of those other things.
Yeah.
And when you let go of them, there's a sense of freedom there. Like we run the
Yeah.
data. I was working with a client the other day, and they have like a roughly $5 million company. And the founder wants to do all of these different things in sales and marketing, but all of
Mhm.
their leads come from 3 sources.
Yeah.
And I'm like, imagine how freeing it is to just focus on those 3 and hire people that know those 3 and not worry about all the other opportunities everybody, quote, opportunities everybody's hitting you with, and just going down those paths. And when you do it really well, it is freeing to let go of and really focus on the things that work and not be bothered by all the noise that's out there.
Yeah. I think it sounds like how do you think about this phrase? In a lot of ways, you're helping founders learn to trust again.
I think they do come around. It's interesting to dig into that, learning to trust again. I'll use the first thing that comes to mind is like our B2B founders. What they do is they grew the company through networking and their relationships. And then they went and tried a lot of sales and marketing tactics, and they blew a lot of money and didn't get our ROI. So immediately they don't trust anything anymore. They don't trust the vendors. They don't trust the hiring. And they're back at that plateau again because of trust. And so when we come in, I think we can help with that trust factor, because we're like, hey, you were already on the right track. You just didn't know how to double your efforts because of the time factor, right? So let's
Mm,
trust in what got you here and double down on that. Let's find other ways that are adjacent to complement how you're doing sales and marketing, and then build that trust back up. So I like the way you phrased it. I haven't thought about it in that way, but it definitely has some correlations.
yeah, and part of that has to do with like they have to trust you enough to like as a starting point. And I think there might even be things they did that didn't work, but the way they did it was the problem, not the thing itself.
Yeah.
And if they can kind of trust you enough to revisit that and try it in a different way, they can see, revenue growth in ways that they would have never thought possible. Right?
Yeah, I would say that's very common, because if you
Yeah.
say, have you tried LinkedIn outreach? Everybody's like, oh yeah, I've tried that. It didn't work. Right. And what we find,
Oh, that's fine.
I mean, okay. Um, so yeah, people will say like, we tried LinkedIn outreach and that didn't work. So what we find is, well, it's how it was done. If you build a list and you just do cold outreach to thousands of people and go, well, it's just a numbers game, then yes, it is very, very low likelihood of working. What we do is say, well, okay, what else are we doing? Well, you've been part of the Chamber of Commerce for 4 years. Have you met
Mhm.
everybody in the chamber? Would it be helpful if you met every business owner in the chamber? And they say, well, yeah, that's how I built the company. I get most of our leads from the chamber. Okay, well, what if we merged the chamber with the outreach on LinkedIn, but we only did it to have one-on-one meetings with people that were already in your peer group? And what we find is the combination of those all of a sudden works, right? It's like,
Yeah.
hey, you're invoking the chamber. You're like, hey, I'm a member of the chamber. I'm looking to see, I'm looking to meet every member, hear how it works for you. If there's events you really like more than others, I'd love to do like a 30-minute coffee meeting. And all of a sudden, LinkedIn now is a great medium, right, that
Yeah.
you can use. And so how it's done matters profoundly. And
Hmm.
I think that's a big part of rebuilding that trust.
Yeah. And I think you're also the other piece of that puzzle is the outcome you're wanting and whether or not you have the right outcome and the right path to that outcome. So for example,
Yeah.
like if your goal is to get meetings with people, does LinkedIn work for getting new meetings? Yes, it does. But if you're trying to like generate sales and you just think one like automated outgoing message to a stranger is going to generate that, you might need to reapproach one your
Right.
desired outcome and the way to get to that outcome. Maybe break it into smaller pieces at least. And so, um, finding if you're trying to get to like Boston and you walk there, like you could do that, I guess,
Right.
hypothetically. But you could also fly there and or drive there, and they're gonna at least get you there in a reasonable amount of time.
Right.
So I think that helps me kind of think about it. I don't know. What do you thought? What do you think?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to get there, and some are significantly more efficient, right? Like
Yeah.
you could run LinkedIn outreach in perpetuity forever, and every time you get through the whole list, go back through the list.
Yeah.
But it's probably not going to have the outcome you want. And so that's a challenge because, I think a lot of vendors claim that they have some secret sauce.
Yeah.
And, then you try again and again. And what I like to tell a lot of our founders is if the if the vendor or the solution only talks about a medium, meaning
Yeah.
email, SMS, calls, if the majority of their focus is on the medium, it's probably not going to
Mhm.
work the way you want. You really
Yeah.
want the medium and the strategy of how it works with how you've built the company. Those
Mm.
combinations are going to have a more
Yeah.
profound impact. And then, like you said, resetting the expectations as well. If you're trying to just go to the directly to a lead and close a deal in a way that you've never done it before, as opposed to build relationships, which is, B2B is a transfer of trust and relationship building.
Hmm.
If it's not
Mm.
that, it's probably not going to work as well as everybody's going to claim. So it's the
Yeah.
overlap of a few things that really make it all come together. And I think that's really the nuance a lot of people don't dig into in the sales and marketing space.
Yeah. And I would also add, like, don't underestimate like really basic goals. So I'll use a simple one, like
Yeah.
for example, is like just reminding people that you're alive. Like that's half the
Yeah.
battle, So if you're active on LinkedIn and you're not necessarily, but if you're at least accomplishing that goal, that's like that's at least one thing, like
Right.
that's at least something. And if you, I think the way I try and think of it is slice it into pieces. But I think a lot of people, they almost look at like the algorithm or some of these technology systems in a superstitious way. So they're like, I have to sort of like make a sacrifice to the algorithm god and then he'll like me and
Yeah.
then I'll get some kind of reward. But that tends to do the opposite of what you're talking about, which is I'm blaming something externally instead of looking inwardly and going, maybe the way I'm doing this is a problem. And if I want to get better at it, then I need to kind of learn and grow and keep iterating. Um, and so we have the option to sort of blame and just keep failing, which will just be miserable. So why do that?
Right.
Or we can grow and get better. And maybe if it still doesn't work, then we can just do something different. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So we've named this phenomenon for founders delegate and ditch. And so
Okay.
what we find is a lot of founders do what we call delegate and ditch. And I think you actually just hinted on a way that I hadn't spoken on it before, but it still rings true is so I hired a salesperson and now I have this salesperson. Great. I don't have to do all this
Yeah.
anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Delegate and ditch it, right? They don't become the coach, the mentor. They don't plan to spend the next year with that person side by side. They just
Yeah.
offload everything and then wonder why it doesn't work. They do it with
Yes.
marketing vendors, right? This SEO person said they were going to solve my problems. I'm going to write a check. They're going to make it rain leads, right? That's delegate and ditch. I
Mhm.
think you just hinted on another one with what you said around you're delegating and ditching, to the algorithm gods or the social media, right? Like I'm just going to do all this and it's going to do this other thing. And that's just
Yeah.
not true, right? It's really
Mhm.
looking internally. Like we tell people when they're hiring salespeople, especially their first salespeople, is you need to be a mentor, not a manager. If you
Yeah.
decide that for the next year you're going to be a mentor, not a manager, you're your chance of success with that salesperson goes up infinitely, right? With
Okay.
multiples higher. If you think you're just going to hire a salesperson and delegate and ditch, it's probably not going to go as well as you think. So yeah, I think there's all kinds of ways that we as founders delegate and ditch. And it's almost like, I know why too. It's like a blow off valve, right? Like you're just so tired of grinding. You're hoping somebody can take over this piece for you. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's just not normally the case, right? You really have to walk the journey with them until they've taken over the amount of items that you need in the way that you need to make that successful. So it's very different.
Yeah. So there's a passage from my book where I talk about this idea, and it actually comes from Dave Ramsey, his book Entrepreneurship. Have you read it?
I haven't read that one, no.
Okay. So he talks about this, that uses a rope as a visual to convey the concept of delegation. And in the analogy, the rope represents, responsibility. So when it comes to delegation, he suggests we hand someone the end of the rope and then you feed it to them until all we have is just the end.
Okay.
But as a business owner, I went through a season where I threw the rope at my team, like you said, and I walked away, usually without communicating expectations. And if I came back and they had not done what I thought they would do, I was disappointed. And so doing this repeatedly obviously caused me to overcorrect and become a catalyst for the opposite, where, I'm holding all of the rope except they're holding the end. And it's like, what are they going to do with that? So
Right.
that's kind of an interesting visual that I attached to when I read his book.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I hadn't read that one. I need to add that to the
Mhm.
list.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so let's shift into talking about revenue generation, and you there is a distinct difference, although there probably are some overlaps between B2C and B2B revenue generation. So talk to us what makes them fundamentally different and also where they're similar.
Yeah. So one thing we learned early on, I learned it with my last company, I learned it working with founders, is when a founder looks out into the market and looks up sales and marketing, there's kind of this perception that almost any of these solutions can work for any business.
Mhm.
And what we found is it's really not true for the most part. There are unique instances where certain items work more commonly for B2B and more commonly for B2C. And
Mhm.
knowing just that difference can save significant amount of money, right? For me in my first company, I spent over $300,000 learning this lesson until I learned it and then was able to scale past the plateau from there. Um, but some of the main differences, I'll get to the core difference between B2B and B2C. B2B is about trust and relationships. When you're doing a B2B transaction, you're building trust, you're networking and using relationships oftentimes to get to the person, the buyer that you're speaking with. And there's a transfer of trust. There's usually more money in the deal, and there's a selection process. And it comes in through that transfer of trust. So if you look at B2C, there's still a transfer of trust, but there's a less of a leap of faith, right? Somebody's job isn't on the line to see an ad on Instagram and pull out a credit card and buy a $20 item. Whereas in B2B, somebody's job is on the line or can be on the line, or they're going to be troubled if it doesn't go as well as they want, right? There's all kinds of scenarios there. And so what we find is with those fundamental differences, what that means from a revenue generation perspective is in B2B, what is core to lead generation is feet on the street. It's business development reps, it's networking events, it's people. The sales team, when you look at a B2B organization and how the founder grew it, all the leads came in through people, networking in some way or form or fashion, and building trust. And marketing is a complement to getting more of that done.
Mhm.
The opposite or the difference is B2C. When you look at a B2B framework, or sorry, a B2C framework, business to consumer, majority of the leads is done through marketing. So marketing team generates the leads, and that person either comes in and buys and converts, comes into a retail store, or speaks to somebody on the team like an intake team, depending on if there is at least some level of a buying cycle. So when you look at it and really understand, B2B is relationship, trust, and lead generation is done through networking and humans. And B2C is leads are generated through what you would consider maybe traditional marketing, SEO, ads, things like
Mhm.
that. when you look at it that way, you see how fundamentally different they are and start to realize
Yeah.
why the strategies don't necessarily or often do not cross over.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I'll give you like a weird example to see if there are more overlap.
Yeah.
If you have a B2C that is high luxury, high price point, is it more like B2B, or is it still distinctly different in certain ways?
So a luxury good, that may be tough for me to answer given that I'm mostly in the services space. um, so it is a transfer of trust, but I don't know if the buying cycle is necessarily the same, right? When I think, let me think through this, right? Um, I listened to the Acquired podcast and they had this really good episode on LVMH, right? Which
Okay.
has like all these high end luxury brands. And when I think of that initially, what I think of is there is usually a person with means still going in to pay cash or swipe a credit card for a luxury good. In that
Hmm.
case, maybe a purse, an outfit, whatever else it might be, which is still very different from a B2B sense where somebody had to get referred into a company that's going to make $100,000 purchase that takes 6 months to close. And there's a group of people that have to approve this purchase. So
Mm.
maybe a little out of my depth to, do a straight up comparison on luxury goods. But in a lot of ways, there's still a person that has the money that walks into a Fendi and makes the purchase, right? Or
Yeah.
walks onto the Porsche lot and buys a
Mm.
Porsche. And that's a very different buying cycle, but there could be some
Yeah.
impact. I think the
Yeah,
other
that's
thing is,
interesting.
we
Yeah.
focus in the founder space. So we know
Yeah,
what
yeah.
works for founders and I don't try to understand
Yeah.
what Porsche does, and how they do it. It's fundamentally different. I think that's important to note.
Well, I think the decision making, like the decision maker, is the consumer, whereas in a business you have more layers, and ultimately, I guess the founder or the president is still making decisions, but there's operational layers to it, plus the outcomes are desired business outcomes, which usually involve a variety of kind of working components. So
Yeah.
that kind of makes sense. So you've talked a lot about B2B is about trust and relationships, and B2C is more in line with traditional marketing. So let's kind of dive into the B2B side of it first, and then we'll dive more into the B2C. Um, like what if you're a company and you're wanting to grow your revenue and you're either hitting the ceiling or you're not even at the ceiling yet, like what are they missing on the trust and relationship side? Like what's their blind spot?
So there's a few different ones that we see pretty commonly. The first one is that on like a B2B sense where they have this trust, the blind spot is trying to use a low trust medium to drive leads.
Yeah.
So for example, we would tell any founder we work with, when you're utilizing capital, social media, organic social media, the act of posting is not going to drive B2B leads. You can pretty much post as much as you want. You probably don't have the budget for it. But like when it comes to comparing against everything else, it's not going to drive the leads you're looking for. So there are mediums where the medium is a lower trust medium when it's a B2B buyer and based on who you're trying to speak with. They don't use it in that way. They're not using it for a B2B service selection process most of the time. The other thing that we find when we really dig into it is there's not a lot of transfer of trust on their website. So they don't have sales enablement content. They don't have reviews. They don't have videos. They don't have testimonials. And what we find with the clients who have a lot of traction in B2B is they're capturing a lot of that on their website. If you go to, for example, the Founder Scale clutch.co review site, you're going to see nothing but reviews from other founders like you. And
Mm.
so we reflect on that. Like we pull that up and say, these are other founders like you. We don't claim, kind of going back to me babbling through your answer with LVMH and Porsche, right? We don't work with Coke. We don't believe that what works for these big companies works for founders. Um,
Yeah.
So we show that all of our reviews are from founders, right? We
Mm,
understand the challenges they're going through. So yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do in the website. You can use social. There's lots of ways that you can help transfer the trust and show that this business can grow past the founder. And what's not going to happen is you're going to talk to the founder, they're going to talk a great game and then outsource the work, and you're still kind of in the same place. Right.
yeah,
So there's a trust building that has to happen in that B2B space, and it has to resonate across all of your content.
yeah. And I think so you talked about earlier a little about sales and marketing, the difference and how they play to this. And so with B2B sales, you say sales and feet on the street drive leads.
Yeah.
And that really is my inclination. Like if I were to lose all my freelance clients right now and I just needed to get clients, like I'd be on the street, I'd be at networking events,
Yeah.
I'd be reaching out to people. I would just lean into sales. I mean, I would do some marketing stuff to complement that, but marketing is slow. Sales is fast. What do you think about that?
Yeah, totally true. Like when we meet a founder at first, what we say is you don't need sales and marketing, you need a revenue team. It's not the traditional, again, it's not the big company model of like your marketing team is this army of 50 people over here and your sales team are these 20 people over here. Like that's not a founder led company in most cases. And so it's normally a few of each of those depending on the
Hmm.
size company we're working with. And so we say you need a revenue team that's working tightly in concert. And how do you make that happen? Well, we can show you how you make that happen. But I totally agree. Like if you need more leads as a B2B company, you start going back to where you started. You start going to the chamber events, you go to the networking events, you go to the association where you have a lot of traction in a certain vertical or industry, and you just double back down on what got you there. And so once a founder realizes that, it often brings them back to where they started. And then they start to see, okay, I need to scale that up and complement that process with marketing. Now I have a revenue model that I
Yes.
can go forward with.
Yeah. And they could also define all the pieces, the actions, tactics, and roles. And they
Exactly.
could also start to delegate those roles out. There's one other dynamic. This can be a blind spot. When a founder is doing what you're describing, what we're describing, they do have something that even if they delegate this task out, that they cannot delegate, which is they are the founder.
Yeah.
And I don't think we founders often appreciate it until we realize it, that there's a weight to that. So if you're at a networking event, you are talking to someone, just being the founder is different than if you had a account executive or salesperson doing that same thing, but not the founder. That's a different dynamic. Would you agree with that, or am I off the mark?
100%. So I would say like in my first company that you mentioned and I grew and sold, I was way off base on this. Like, just throw it out
Okay.
there, way off base. I would hire a salesperson and say, like we would have a quota of $500,000. And my thought was, you're doing all the same things I'm doing. You're going to these networking events, you're doing all the same thing. And while running a business, I closed $1 million in sales this year. And you have full time, you're dedicated to this full time as a sales rep, and your quota is 500,000, right? That should work out in theory. I think it's a lot more nuanced now, right? That I've actually scaled past that mindset and helped other founders with it. I actually don't think it's true in a lot of ways. Because like you said, when I walk into the room, it says you're the owner on the card. You're the president. So for example, if I sell to other executives and founders, they want to talk to other like-minded people. They're more willing to
Mhm.
have coffee just to brainstorm whether it's a sales call or not.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think um, I missed as a founder too is you can quickly reflect on all of your experience. If you have a decade in your company or a decade of experience, when anybody asks a question, you have an answer that just comes to the forefront of your mind because you've been doing it so long.
Hmm.
Somebody can mention something and say, well, have you done something in this industry? And I can say, well, it wasn't exactly your industry, but it was very adjacent in that it was this, this, and this. And here's what we
Hmm.
did, and speak the lingo right off the cuff. No problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your new hire BD person generally can't do that. Even if
Yeah.
they've been in the industry, it's still kind of hard for them to have that skill set and relate it to your company.
Mhm.
So I think there's all kinds of mindset shifts I had to have, which goes towards that model where, I wanted to be now when we advise and when we hire BD people, we say, hey, you're going to be a mentor instead of a manager for the next year. You're going to stand by them. They're going to hear you say these and be able to pick up on that verbiage. And I think those are just two quick examples that it comes up. I think there's a whole list of other examples where,
Yeah.
the wind is in our sail as the founder walking into these networking events.
Another layer here is just how you structure compensation and how you develop the game that they're playing. As a founder, as the business owner, you have ownership literally. And so we financially get the benefits of that if the company is successful. And so if you don't structure your compensation package with your team, they may not have that same level of ownership in their motivation. What would you say to that?
We've had one challenge after
Oh, did I
another.
lose you?
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
there's a couple interesting things on comp that are really different in a founder led company. Cause again, it's one of those things where like you go talk to somebody that's a comp expert and they work with all these large companies and tell you how it should work. And there's the reality of being a founder led company where you have one salesperson or three salespeople, right? But not an army of them and sales managers and things like that, which can be really complicated. So the first one that comes to mind that I think a lot of founders do kind of incorrectly is they immediately jump to talking about the commission. So, meaning that the game, as you said, is they have some base and then everything jumps to commission. And so there's this hurry up and sell type of mentality. It's like, man, if they don't close a deal in the next 3 months, this isn't going to work. Like, we need the commission, we need the sales coming in, right? There's no long term view of that. What we found is there needs to be that ramp up time. Like we just said, you're not the founder walking in where you have all the right answers and you can close a deal in 30 days because you're the founder. It takes longer for those people to understand and learn your business and what to say and what not to say and generate those leads. So what we like to do is we like to build incentive plans where the first portion of learning is actually you get bonuses on doing the activities that lead to the results. So
Okay.
we would say, okay, you need to have
Yeah.
this many calls,
I
this
like
many
that.
LinkedIn messages. You need to go to this many networking events. You need to have this many one-on-one coffees. And every month that you do that and hit that, the quota is not a sales quota for the first 6 months. It's an activity quota for the
Yeah.
activities that really turn into sales later.
Hmm.
And what we find is when we bridge the gap that way and come up with a 1 year plan on how that person's going to get trained and up to speed and start to hit little quotas and get wins along the way, they also feel like they're progressing. And then, like you said, the founder can do it with them, which is one thing we advise. We say, well, go to these networking events along with the person. Show how many you actually did to get that result. Now they also believe that it's possible. So there's a lot of competing factors, especially when you're not a large company and can't just point to the guy over there or girl over there and say, "Hey, they hit quota. Why can't you hit quota?" There's not that other person to
Yeah.
point to. So there's just a lot of nuances in a founder-led company where the advice that the founder gets to build a sales team or get that first salesperson doesn't quite translate the same way for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the activity based commission idea is really a powerful one because it's almost like if you're focusing on the thing that you know is going to generate the result. And if you keep doing that thing, it's going to naturally generate the result. And then if there's something wrong, you just tweak the activity and it'll generate a different result. And so if you focus on, like, it's almost like that kind of thing we talked about letting go. Like, if you focus on the outcome, trying to control the outcome, you almost stop doing the actions that will lead to, you can almost self-sabotage.
Yeah.
Would as you say that's the case often?
Yeah, you're self-sabotaging because, like, if you only focus on the commission and the sales right out of the gate, then every week you're having, or day or whatever your rhythm is, you're having a stand up and talking to that salesperson, be like, "Where's the sales? Where's the sales? Where's the sales?" Or that's what it can feel like if they're not really
Mm,
mentoring them. And so eventually that just grinds on them and they are not getting any wins.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're really coming from a point of saying, well, I just need you to make sure you're going to 2 networking events a week and you're having at least 4 one-on-ones a week for the first 90 days. Let's just get to there. Then you're
Mhm.
not overwhelming them with all these other challenges and they can get those wins. And what we like to do is we like to bonus them on that. So if you hit the early commission or in the early days, the first like say 30 to 60, 90 days, we may say, well, if you just do that, you get a $250 bonus. It
Mhm.
has nothing to do with sales. We're just
Yeah.
going to incentivize you on the behavior that drives the results. Whereas, like you said, if you just keep coming back to them asking if they've closed a deal yet, which is kind of how it comes across a lot of times, that may not be the actual behavior. Um, then again, you're just sabotaging it. You're not saying, well, what leads to getting those deals, and what are you doing about that? That's more important.
Yeah, and so Mark Roberge, I think I'm saying his name wrong, but the former CRO, Chief Revenue Officer of HubSpot, he's got a great talk on YouTube, and one of the things he talks about that kind of really resonated or stuck with me is he talks about like this golf trainer teaching someone golf, like two approaches to teaching someone golf. And one trainer can essentially like look at what you're doing and go, oh, these are the 10 things you're doing wrong, point them all out and try and work at all 10 of them at once. And the other one, which he found to be more effective empirically, was just pick one of the 10 things, focus on that, get that piece in place, then focus on the next one, get that piece in place, then focus on the next one. And you work through the 10 versus trying to do all of them at once. And I think that's kind of what the system you're talking about allows for. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great analogy because a lot of people go into founder-led or small businesses and they'll say, you're drinking from the fire hose.
Yeah.
We're just unleashing all the knowledge on you as fast as possible so you can get up to speed and get effective as fast as possible. But that's not necessarily the best way to become effective. It's those little things like, hey, you and I, new sales rep, are going to go to 2 networking events a week together and you're going to get the pitch right. And you're going to be able to answer all the questions that they have. Well, what happens downstream? Well, later when you're on a sales call and somebody has a similar question, you're going to be able to answer it. You
Mhm.
know, so I like to start to, like you said, you start with the first pieces and you get good at that, or and then you move into deeper and deeper discussions instead of just trying to overwhelm them. And I think that's another thing that a lot of founders, including myself in the past, have taken for granted. It seems easy, but they have all this knowledge, the founder does, but they sometimes forget that they built that knowledge over years, sometimes
Yeah.
decades.
Yeah.
And so it comes super natural to you, but it's because you've been doing it so long. And so
Yeah.
that's a different issue we run into where, I like the trainer analogy. That's a great, I'm going to have to use that in the future.
Yeah. So let's shift to B2C. So that is more the marketing side, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's probably where social media really you can really hit it off. But marketing drives leads versus marketing supporting leads in B2B. Dive in deeper to that.
Yeah, so when we do the comparison case, when you have B2B on one side, the top 5, the top areas we see people driving leads are networking events, conferences, things that get one-to-one feet on the street. When we look at B2C, we see a lot of other strategies work, meaning we will see things like ads work, whether that's Facebook or Google ads. You're going to have a lot more impact through doing that. When we see even B2C services, health, wellness, and fitness, ads work very well. SEO starts to work a lot better. So SEO we see is one of those crossovers where we do see it work in B2B and B2C, but it works significantly better in B2C. Like the return on
Mm,
investment comes faster.
yeah.
Whereas in B2B, it's a lot more nuanced in if you can make B2B really work from an ROI perspective, the time and money you put into it
Yeah.
to the deals you get. So some of those just have a lot more traction. So SEO ads are very common, whether it's organic, social, or social ads makes a big difference. The product mix can make a big difference in there, but you're getting your leads through what you would consider a different marketing channel where the marketing is what's driving the leads, not the
Mm,
person going and networking.
yeah. And I guess in a way, the business, the decision making, uh, both in terms of how it's done, how direct it is, and how long it takes, can be a bit different for B2C compared to B2C, right?
The decision-making process?
Yeah,
Oh, definitely. I mean,
yeah,
if you think about, um, somebody seeing an ad,
hmm,
you're targeted with that ad, and the targeting's gotten even better, right? You could have searched for something on your phone, and now you're getting an ad. They already know you
yeah,
kinda wanna buy, and it's $20. Well, a lot of things I think there's thresholds in all areas where depending on the buyer, there's a threshold in which somebody is going to pull out their credit card and buy without even batting an eye. You know,
hmm,
if you're selling goods B2C and it's to people with a higher income, the threshold may be $100. Anything under $100, they're going to see the ad and say, I want that. I want to try it. I'm willing to go buy it and find out whether I like it.
yeah,
Um, and so that's very different than the buyer journey for something B2B.
yeah,
So there's just a whole different it's a whole different mentality in that journey and whether one person can pull out a credit card and get what they want
yeah,
and then the immediacy of that.
yeah. Now, what would you say, like, if I was selling a book to a business owner, would you call that just a book being a B2C, or is it because of who I'm selling it to makes it B2B?
I've heard some compelling arguments on like that would be B2C. I think some people have some really good places that they come from on that. What I look at, and at least the framework I use is where is the money coming from? If the money is coming from a business, like that founder is getting a book and they're paying it out of their business,
Mm,
then it's kind of part of a B2B transaction. And I think there's nuance. A book may be a hard
mm,
one because if I wanted to buy a book, I just buy a book. If it's
yeah,
$20, it could come out of the business, it could come out of my personal. It's kind of inconsequential. But let's up the game a bit. Let's
yeah,
say you're joining an association that is $6,000 a year that is only built for founders to join. Well, there could be a compelling argument that that's B2C because the founder wants to join it or the business owner wants to join it. And
yeah,
they are writing the check out of the business, but it's 100% their decision and they have all the latitude they want.
yeah,
However, if that person didn't have a company or their company wasn't successful at the moment and they didn't have the money in the account, would they still write that $6,000 check?
hmm,
That check or the writing of it is more aligned with the company having the money than them personally having the money.
oh, okay,
So I think you can get into a lot of nuance around, do you qualify it as B2B or B2C? But when you really want to start to look at how you spend money in sales and marketing, you can look at that buyer journey. You can look
yeah,
at, is there a selling process and a selling cycle? Does this involve trust and relationships, or is it a little more transactional? And the difference between trust and relationship and more transactional really tells you what medium or type of sales and marketing strategy you have at the end of the day.
yeah. And I guess part of me almost wonders, like, if B2B is sales and feet on the street leads drives leads, and then marketing supports that, and then B2C is marketing drives leads. Part of me almost wonders which of those strategies is more effective, kind of trumps the other, right?
Yeah, so the strategy that is, one strategy is better than the other when you look at what you want to sell. So
Yeah.
I think if you wanted to, let's say you have two parts of your business. You have a book you want to sell that's kind of the first part of the sales ladder because it's a low cost intro to your services. But then you have a $10,000 a month service you want to sell.
Hmm.
It's going to be very different. So you can probably use your standard B2C marketing tactics and do ads to promote the book. And then you can upsell from there, but you're going to have to go past the book to build the relationship with the person. So
Yeah.
now how are you combining those to build the sales ladder and say, well, it
Hmm.
might actually be better for you not to do B2C tactics and sell the book. What's probably actually better is that you have a cover letter and you meet an entrepreneur or founder, whoever the buyer is, and you mail them the book with a nice message
Yeah.
and then you
Yeah.
build a relationship from there. So
Yeah.
which one's better? That you got your $20 for the book or that you sent them a book with a great letter and you started a relationship that's going to generate a $10,000 a month opportunity. That's what we have to dig into as founders to understand what's really going to
Yeah.
drive the revenue for the business. And what is your goal? Is your goal to sell a million
Yeah.
books, or is it to land 120K contracts? Very
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, that's kind of similar to like my first book is called Path of Freelancer. And so I've sold more books of that than The Jump. But I have one client that I did a speaking event for this book and has paid me like 7 grand. So
Right.
this book, generated $7,000, in a way. And, but that was my goal with this book is it was more of like what you're describing, which is like this business card, so to speak, fancy business card.
Right. And it goes
Yeah.
back to what we talked about earlier around like the 20% or, that drives 80% of the results.
Yeah.
And the shiny objects we talked about, right? Do you want to spend time trying to figure out how to sell books for $10 and $20 each? Or do you want to spend time utilizing your book to sell $7,000 deals or
Yeah.
$100,000 deals?
Yeah.
Like one can distract from the other
Hmm.
significantly. It just depends what your business model is.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So what else when it comes to B2B and B2C, what else would you want to emphasize or dive into that we haven't already done to kind of close out the topic here?
Yeah, I think the first thing is really just founders knowing that there's a fundamental difference between the two. Like just knowing that alone and really looking and saying, when I look at a vendor, when I hire somebody, when I hire a sales or marketing person, can they articulate the difference in B2B and B2C and how that fundamentally changes the strategy?
Hmm.
Whereas, that's a lot harder is if you look out and you don't observe that the vendor you're looking to hire has nothing but B2C logos on their website that are large companies that are 100 million in revenue,
Mm,
and you're B2B and under 10 million in revenue, right? Like you really have to key in on that one thing. The other thing I like to leave behind is it's not that there's not enough options on how to solve this. It's kind of like the book strategy we just talked about. It's doing something really well and ensuring it works. It's not
mm,
spreading yourself too thin. Like that's another unique area is as a founder, you run out of time and then
yeah.
you have limited resources. I think every
Hmm.
business has to a degree limited
Yeah.
resources, but in the founder instance, they're even more limited from a capital perspective.
Hmm.
So you're not looking to see like what are the 10 things that could work. You're really looking to know what the one thing is that works really well. And if you just double down and did more of less, you would be very successful. And over time, you can add the second thing. Over time, you can add the third thing. And that's okay. Don't get caught up in what everybody's telling you about having to be on all these channels at all the same time and making it all work together, because what we find in the data is actually fundamentally not true.
Yeah.
Most founders we work with have one thing they figured out how to do really well, and they're
Hmm.
working on a second or working on a third after they've really
Yeah.
created a repeatable process.
Yeah, I like that idea. Really master the one and then add another and then figure out how to work them together and just kind of keep adding it.
Yeah.
Because if you try and do like that golf analogy, like even as a business, if you try to do that, it's such a complex thing to go from 1 to 10. Um, unless you really understand like how to do that, I like the idea of doing it organically, just from my own experience, like kind of growing organically, because then I can understand it and then I'm more likely to be able to replicate it at scale.
Yeah, and sometimes the other thing that I think a lot of people don't look at, and what we always kind of joke about is like, look, any agency will give you the big, amazing plan and be like, hey, if you just spend $100,000, we'll make all this happen. And what we find is it's more about setting a budget that you can stick to in sales and marketing in perpetuity and
Hmm.
going on that journey and then
Yeah,
solving problems as they come up, right? Not
yeah,
dumping all of your budget into one thing, hoping it works. And so it's where the solution and the opportunity meets the capital that's available
yeah,
consistently over time that you start to really figure out repeatable revenue. And so that it's that utilization of capital that's another challenging part, right? If you know you only have $10,000 a month in perpetuity for sales and marketing, you're going to make fundamentally different decisions on how to utilize that than if you have 200,000 a month on sales and marketing as a budget. It's just the way it's going to be. So
Yeah.
those are very different discussions with a founder versus, going and getting these grand plans and having to justify how much to come up with.
Yeah. Yeah. So if someone was like, wow, like Josh, I think you could really help me. My company is hitting that ceiling or we're facing some challenge. Like who's a good fit to work with you? Where in their journey, like what's some milestones where they might be that you can really interface with them in a way that to get the most impact for them?
Yeah, so we find our best clients are actually founders of businesses that have tried to scale past themselves, and they've tried some sales tactics. They've tried some marketing vendors. They've maybe hired some people internally, hired externally, and really have discovered that it's not as easy as the market would have you believe. At that point, we're a really good guide because they figured out this is a tough challenge and they want somebody to walk that journey with them. And so at the point they're at that mindset and they want somebody to walk the journey with them that's been through it and helped other founders, that's the best time for them to come to us.
Yeah. I saw this meme the other day on Facebook. It was like a young person like, "Don't tell me what to do," and then it was like a older person that's like, "Tell me what to do exactly and the order to do it in."
Nice.
And
Yeah.
it's like once you need help, it's like just tell me what to do and how to do it. And I that's what I'm hearing is if someone's like, "Okay, this is a problem I'm having. If you can help me solve it, I want to hire you to do that." So,
Exactly.
is there any category of businesses? Like, do you work with B2B and B2C, or do you focus on one or the other? And then, is there any subgroupings of that?
Yeah, so we work with both B2B and B2C. I would say the most common is services companies. So
Okay,
that's really where we stick to because there is some buying cycle in there. So, on the B2C side, we've had a lot in health, wellness, and fitness, and other B2C type of services like that. Um, and then on the B2B side, we've worked with a lot of different companies, but a lot of those are professional services oriented, where we've worked with agencies to help scale up. We work with financial services, a number of different B2B services companies. So I would say that's the most common theme as we understand the services business, how it
mhm,
comes together, and the nuance of the B2B and B2C. So we can put together really good strategies and plans to make those successful.
okay, yeah. And if someone is interested, like, what's a next step? Should they go to your website? Should they reach out to you on LinkedIn? What's a good next step for them?
Yeah, you can definitely go out to our website, founderscale.com, and hit the contact and just say, I want to speak to Josh, heard him on the podcast and want to talk to him about some of these things he said. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Josh Sweeney, and reach out that way too.
Is there anything that you're going to be doing, anything you're doing or launching that you want to highlight or share with us? What's ahead for Josh?
What's ahead? Um, I think the biggest thing for me is I'm doing a lot more speaking events and hands-on workshops where we
Okay.
actually go into a business with their sales
Mm,
marketing team, their founder, and their head of finance, and
okay.
really help them understand what the strategy should look like. So we have a book, we have a workbook, and I'm enjoying doing a lot of those because it really gets the team aligned across
Mm,
all of those different areas of the business and understand how they impact each other. So I'm doing those as private workshops and public workshops and speaking events. So
yeah.
always looking for ways to do speaking events and help out any association and chamber or group where we can really help more founders that are out there.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Josh, for sharing your wisdom with us today. This has been a Listen to Learn episode of the Share Life podcast. I'm Jason Scott Montoya, and we'll see you on the next episode.